Now we'll start another series in relation to international law and international relation, and that is Cold War. So, how the very Cold War origin and for which particular period it continues, and the very definition, the meaning, and its origin we would like to discuss in this lecture. So, the very term Cold War, it was first coined by an American statesman, Bernard Baruch, in a speech to the South Carolina legislature in 1947. As in that speech, Bernard Baruch expressed that let us not be deceived. We are today in the midst of a Cold War. And Professor Walter Lippmann popularized the very term in the same year in his book in the same name, and that is Cold War. And in that very book, where he described the situation that arisen between the Western powers and the Soviet Union. And in regards to that, he explained that the Western powers and the Soviet Union had come together to fight against the Axis aggression during the Second World War, but however, their relations, though cordial, were suffering from an undercurrent of suspicion about the Anglo American moves on account of delay in opening the second front during the war to relieve German pressure on Soviet front. The secrecy maintained about the atom bomb and the denial of invitation to the police provisional government to San Francisco are the different factors which led the very beginning of Cold War. So scholars placed it as back to the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917 and 18. So, one of the authorities on international law and relations, Desmond Dobley, in his book Struggle for the World, expresses that the Cold War has its origin in the struggle for power in the Central Asia between the rival imperialism of Britain and Russia. In the 19th century, there was that strange period of history known as the Great Games, that humans such as Samarkand and Bokhara were the traditional doctrine of mutual suspicion. Even before the red flag floated over the Winter Palace on that cataclysm day in 1917, and also another international authority and expert on international relation and international law, Frederick Schuman, in his book The Cold War, Retrospect and Prospect, also expressed that at all events, what we have long been the Cold War did not begin in 1945 in the aftermath of World War II and of the Yalta Conference and of the Potsdam Conference. In a broader sense, it began with the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 and 18. So the legacy of mutual fear and suspicion and hatred which nourished the Cold War of the 1940s and 50s originated in the hot war between East and West during the First World War from 1918 to 1921. In the ideological context, the Cold War in Soviet bloc was officially regarded as a unilateral attack by capitalism and imperialism and on the socialistic countries, and where socialistic warriors were regarded as anti-communist hawks. So the very evolution of Cold War, that exactly we trace to the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, as Russia had emerged as a power to be reckoned with Europe. So with the advent of the Second World War, Soviet Russia started cooperation with the Western countries, but this did not help in mitigating the mutual distrust and suspicions. The differing war aims of the two powers also greatly contribute to the growth of Cold War. While Soviet Union was keen to ensure her future security by participating Germany and by creating a buffer zone of friendly East European countries, the United States was keen to restore the conditions necessary for prosperity and to ensuring that a destructive depression did not break out. Refusal of Soviet Union to open the Black Sea Straits and the Danube River as international waters due to her fear that it would have the way for United States commercial penetration on Soviet Eastern Europe. It also caused a friction between these two superpowers. The USA decision in 1947 to remilitarize Greece following UK's withdrawal on the plea that if the United States did not fill the vacuum left by British departure, the Soviet Union would also contribute to Cold War. In view of this attitude of United States, Soviet Union also became reluctant to withdraw from Eastern Europe. It felt that by continuing to occupy Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union would at least negate any threat of nuclear aggression. The act and the very impact of all the above developments was an aggravation of Cold War, and it was between the two superpowers, Soviet Union and the Western powers. And now we would like to discuss the very basis of Cold War. So, in that regard, the first basis could be that Cold War as a product of mutual antagonism, as they hold that the mistrust and the consequent fears were the basis of this conflict. So the mutual fear and suspicion produce hostile interaction between two parties such as Soviet Union and the Western countries. And both the parties were not willing to take any initiative to reduce tension. And another important basis of Cold War could be rooted in ideological incompatibilities. So, the very incompatibilities of ideology, for example, there is too much difference in ideologies of the United States and Russia to work out a long term program of cooperation as Soviet Union crusading communist ideology, and it was taken as essentially a totalitarian and anti-democratic and a threat to freedom and liberty throughout the world. So, in that sense, would like to discuss the views expressed by the then President of United States, President Eisenhower, also said we face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless and in purpose, and insidious in method. To counter this threat, the United States embarked upon a crusade to eliminate the salient set of ideas from the globe. This view looks often the Cold War as a battle for allegiance of man's mind on the pattern of religious wars of past. So the conflict was quite bitter because the ideological differences are mostly found instead of conciliation and cooperation. And the next important basis that we could discuss the mutual misunderstanding, as both parties saw in their own action only virtue and in the action of the adversary only malice. This naturally gave rise to distrust towards each other. The Soviet suspicion of America was based on letters in Manson in Russia in 1918 and 1919, refusal to establish diplomatic relations till 1933, and the wartime experience. For example, the American refusal to inform the Soviet Union about the Manhattan Project to develop atomic bomb, delay in sending the Soviets promised land-lease support, and the failure to open up the second front, which made Stalin suspect that the American policy was to let the Russians and Germans destroy each other, so that the United States could then pick up the pieces from among the rubble and use of atomic bomb against Japan. So likewise, United States nourished hostility towards Soviet Union because of increasing indications of growing Soviet belligerence. This feeling arose because of Russian willingness to permit democratic elections in countries liberated from the Nazis, their refusal to assist in post-war reconstruction in regions outside Soviet control, the maintenance of an unnecessarily large armed forces after war. And now we'll discuss the very phases of development of Cold War. So in that connection, we'll discuss the first phase, which lasted from 1946 to 1949. So, in an atmosphere of mutual distrust and suspicion, Western Bloc had nourished that the feeling that if strong pressure could be exerted on the Soviet Union, the communist regime would soon crumble down like a house of cards. The Western Bloc was laboring under this idea because America had atom bomb monopoly and Russia lacked it. It was generally held that America, which was militarily superior to Soviet Union, could be in a command of the world and influence the domestic affairs of the Soviet Union. The United States resorted to the direct military action during this phase through Truman Doctrine of 1947 and economic integration of West European powers as envisaged in Marshall Plan of 1947. America pursued the policy of intervention and the vendor of status quo during this period. Anti-communist feelings with the United States endeavored to implant throughout the world were the hallmarks of this period of antagonism and the growth of Cold War. And in the second phase that lasted from 1949 to 1953, which witnessed the continuation of America's policy and military and economic aid against Soviet Union. The United States concluded security treaty with Australia and New Zealand and peace treaty with Japan in 1951. The Korean War also occurred during this period. In between North Korea and South Korea, where South Korea was supported by the United States and North Korea was supported by Russia. And in that field also, the American and Russian troops remained stationed in both sides of Korea. So during this second phase, the mutual distrust and suspicion and antagonism between these two powers increased. So this is the development during the second phase of Cold War. And now we would go to the third phase. And during the third phase, which lasted from 1953 to 1957, the United States continued its policy of military and economic offensive against the Soviet bloc. Two new US-sponsored treaties emerged. One of them was the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization or SEATO and the Middle East Defense Organization or MEDO. Also the emergence of these two new treaties for new defense links with NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. America also endeavored to enhance its area of influence in the Middle East by extending the Truman Doctrine to this region. The United States succeeded in establishing number of military bases around Soviet territory and entered into defense treaties with almost 43 countries. And during this period, United States got entangled in Vietnam War, which turned out to be a climax of Cold War. In response to that, the Soviet Union during this period did not lag behind. The Soviet Union concluded the Warsaw Treaty with East European powers to counteract NATO. It entered into defense treaties with 12 states. Even the American bid of counter-revolution in Hungary was foiled this period was also marked by permanency of the Potsdam partition of Germany, the division of Germany into two, German Democratic Republic in Soviet bloc and Federal Republic of Germany in American bloc. Occurred during this period, both the US and Soviet Union exploded hydrogen bomb simultaneously during this period. So now we would like to go to the fourth phase that lasted from 1957 to 62, and this very fourth phase that lasted from 1957 to 62 was marked by two extreme trends. On the one hand, the principle of coexistence were pronounced, and on the other hand, the world saw the most dangerous Cuban Missile Crisis, which virtually brought the entire mankind on the brink of the Third World War. So, this period is another major factor relating to the Cold War, and also during this period, the Berlin crisis of 1961 following USSR or Soviet Union's threat to unilaterally terminate American access to Berlin and to make peace with East Germany also gave a setback to efforts and improvement of relation between the two superpowers. The crisis arose due to Iraq's erection of 25 miles long Berlin partition wall by Soviet Union to check the fleeing refugees from East Berlin to West Berlin. Again, the Cuban crisis brought both the superpowers at the threshold of war. And now we would like to go to the fifth phase, which lasted from 1962 to 1969. And that is marked by a deep appreciation of the futility of nuclear weapons. There was a worldwide concern demanding ban on nuclear weapons. The partial test ban treaty was concluded in 1963. The Geneva Hotline Agreement of 1963 brought United States and Soviet Union more closer. The Non-Proliferation Treaty NPT of 1968 was also made possible due to good offices of both the superpowers. However, the problem of Germany and Vietnam was still a crisis for both the blocs. So now we would like to go to another important phase, which is considered as détente. So the very word détente, it is a French term. So that period of détente continued from 1969 to 1978, and which was marked by détente. So in 1972, President Nixon of United States paid a visit to Moscow and signed two agreements. These agreements included the Treaty on the Limitation of Anti-Ballistic Missile System and the Interim Agreement on certain measures with respect to the limitation of strategic offensive arms. The first treaty imposed limitations on the United States and the Soviet Union to two sides for ballistic missile defenses, one to protect their national capital areas and the other to protect the field of intercontinental ballistic missiles, and submarine launched ballistic missiles. Both these treaties went a long way in effecting improvement of relation between the two blocs. In 1970, Soviet Union signed a treaty with West Germany and agreed not to use force against her. This greatly contributed to the reduction of tension in Europe. This was followed by an agreement over Berlin between Soviet Union, Britain, United States, and France, which was indicative of the intentions of all powers to reduce tension. In 1973, the Soviet chief of the Communist Party, Leonid Brezhnev, which also visited Washington, where summit talks were held. Both the world leaders discussed important matters concerning the peace in the world and agreed to work together for enduring peace and to end the nuclear arms race. These summit talks resulted in signing of four important agreements between United States and Soviet Union. These agreements envisaged the cooperation in the field of research in agriculture, transportation, and expansion of cultural and scientific exchange between the two countries. It also agreed to negotiate a mutual treaty aiming at the reduction of nuclear weapons and cooperation in nuclear power research. The progress in mutual relations between Moscow and Washington was not affected in the wake of change in leadership in the United States when President Nixon resigned following Watergate scandal. And this continued as President Ford concluded an agreement with Leonid Brezhnev, the chief of the Soviet Union, for limiting strategic offensive weapons for the next 10 years. The Summit Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe held in Helsinki in 1975 was attended by both the leaders. A new dimension was added to Cold War in the wake of Sino-Soviet rift. A new tension built up between Soviet Union and China, as well as China and United States. However, after the period of détente set in, there was considerable improvement in relation between United States and China. In 1971, the then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, the US Secretary, paid a secret visit to China to explore the possibilities of reapproachment with China. This visit was followed by Shanghai Communique, which gave signals of the possible détente between United States and China. The Cold War between China and United States virtually came to an end with the exchange of ambassadors in 1979. There were still many points of conflict between the two superpowers, and they continued to pursue the policy of containment of the opponent. So the détente between US and USSR or Soviet Union also did not automatically lead to mitigation of all strains of Cold War. So it continued as, for example, the United States continued support on build-off in Iran to retain or influence in the Middle East and to counteract the growing influence of Russia in the region. Similarly, the American move to combat the Diogo Gracia Island into a military base was primarily designed to check the Soviet presence in the Indian Ocean area. On the other hand, Soviet Union submitted proposals for Asian collective security with a view to replace the American sphere of influence in Southeast Asia as well as to contain China. During the Bangladesh crisis of 1971 and the Egypt-Israel War of 1973, also the two superpowers extended support to the opposite sides. And now we'll go to the seventh phase, and that is the period started since 1979. The Treaty on the Limitation of Strategic Offensive Arms signed in 1972 between United States and Soviet Union lapsed in October 1977. A treaty between the United States and the Soviet Union on the limitation of strategic offensive arms during the period up to 1985 was signed in Vienna in 1979 by the then American President Jimmy Carter and the Soviet chief of Communist Party and the head of Soviet Union Leonid Brezhnev, and which is popularly known as the SALT II Agreement. The Cold War was perhaps on its last leg had the SALT II been ratified earlier, because the requirement of ratification by the Congress or the Senate of the United States, as the circumstances would have it, the prospect of mitigating Cold War were marked by sudden developments in Afghanistan, where Soviet Union's armed intervention rather aggravated the situation. It fanned the embers of Cold War. The sudden political developments in Afghanistan in 1976, as the Afghan government was overthrown by an Armed Forces Revolutionary Council and Nur Muhammad Taraki emerged as the new president of Afghanistan. Soviet Union, which shares almost 900 to 1000 kilometer long common border with Afghanistan, recognized the Taraki regime on 1978. During 1978, Kabul and Moscow signed various agreements of mutual interest. But in December 1978, a treaty of friendship and cooperation was signed between Soviet Union and Afghanistan. Developments took dramatic turn in 1979 when Habibullah Amin replaced Taraki as head of the government of Afghanistan. Even the Amin regime was also overthrown in a sudden coup on 27 December 1979. He was replaced by Babrak Karmal. The Karmal regime was backed by Soviet troops who had landed in Kabul during December 1979. And the initial estimate were that the Soviet troops in Afghanistan were numbering between 15 1 lakh 50,000 to 2 lakh, but later the number swelled to over millions. The Russians' intervention in Afghanistan crisis added a new dimension to the process of data, and the forces of Cold War have been reactivated. So now I would like to discuss the very implications of the Cold War. So in first instance, it gave rise to a fear psychosis which resulted in mind and it a mad race for the manufacture of more sophisticated armaments. Both the power blocks tried to acquire more and more sophisticated weapons. They set in motion a mad race for armaments. And the second implication that led due to Cold War, the formation of various alliances during the peacetime. Both the blocs formed alliances and counter-alliances to counterbalance the growing power of the opponent. Some of the alliances which were thus formed include the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the SEATO, SHANTO, Warsaw Pact, etc. The existence of these alliances added to world tension. And the third implication that we found large number of nations of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, after attainment of independence, decided to keep away from the military alliances sponsored and supported by the two superpowers. Instead, they preferred to follow the policy of non-alignment. Thus, it can be said that the emergence of the policy of non-alignment under the able guided leadership of the then Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, also the direct outcome of the Cold War. And the fourth instance that implication we found on Cold War, it was greatly undermined the chances of attaining the goal of one world on account of mutual rivalry. The two superpowers were not willing to trust each other and often took opposite stands at United Nations. This often resulted in blocking entry of certain members to the United Nations. So it is well known that United States did not permit People's Republic of China to take its seat in United Nations only because China was a camp follower of Soviet Union. This prevented the United Nations from attaining universal character. And the fifth implication that resulted from Cold War, the mad race for armament, which was the logical outcome of the prevailing Cold War between two power blocs, resulted in diversion of enormous amounts to acquisition of sophisticated weapons. This adversely affected the development of the states and prevented improvement in the living standards of the people. So these are the very important implications of Cold War. That Cold War, which almost why these colors they indicate the very origin of Cold War with the Bolshevik revolutions of Soviet Union in 1917 to 1918 in Russia, which ultimately formed the communist government in Russia and is identified as Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And exactly in 1947, after the post-World War events, the very result leading to the origin and development of Cold War as it was coined by the American statesman Bernard Baruch first time in 1947 and subsequently The very difference between the Cold War was from the ideological ground, as the superpowers have separate ideologies such as the Western Bloc, they are on the believing ideology of capitalism, and as while the Soviet bloc is believing in communism. So, in this lecture, almost we have discussed the very origin, evolution, development of Cold War, and the very implications of Cold War, and how Cold War evolved in different phases in the world. In that connection, we have discussed the first phase, which lasted 1946 to 1949, and the second phase 1949 to 1953, the third phase from 1953 to 1957, the fourth phase from 1957 to 62, then the fifth phase 1962 to 69, then the sixth phase, and that is the period of Deta. So, Deta is particularly means a period when there was an effort in reduction of tensions and conflicts in between the two superpowers, or in between the two blocks, the Western bloc and the Eastern bloc, or the ideological bloc, that we could say capitalism versus communism. And from seventh phase, we would like to discuss in the next upcoming lecture about the period where data was attempted and to achieve a kind of peace by reduction of tension and conflict between the superpowers.